Chums, hello. So, at times it feels like I've turned into the AI guy, but I do other things as well. And I just wanted to talk about something that I did actually a couple of years ago, but I think has real relevance, especially in a period where the undergraduate unit of resource in the United Kingdom is shrinking. We have all sorts of issues about working more effectively and efficiently, and also we still have a responsibility to provide our students with a transformational experience. Even though from my accent you may think that I am a member of the aristocracy, I actually grew up on a council estate in rural Shropshire. Comes out in the accent occasionally. And the thing is, I was the first in my family to go to university. I was first generation. I'm actually last generation as well. Nobody else went. And the thing that I just wanted to talk about was a program that I put together that used very few resources to try and hopefully help students who were from similar backgrounds to myself increase what I saw as gaps in their career capital or social capital. And I'm just going to talk you through it. Let's dive in. So, I want to take a step back in time to 2021. Well, 20 end of 2020, 2021, which at the time I was working as an associate dean for student experience at Salford Business School. And I want to talk through a program I put together, as mentioned, which was around student engagement, hopefully graduate outcomes, but also I had a particular philosophy about what I was trying to do to help students who were from a similar background to myself. First generation at university, not a lot of social capital in the sense that they have access to middle class family members who can help them on their way. Ironically, I am now the middle class family member who help people on the way. I'm currently writing or helping to write 6 or 7 statements of application for university, believe it or not. But it goes to show you, that having connections to network helps. And many first generation students, and I'm also an alumni of the University of Salford, don't have access to those networks. So the other point I'd like to make here is all of the things I talk about in Salford to Success. I'll keep using I, but actually I was really lucky. In that role, my Dean of School, Professor Janice Allen, is, I think, a really unusual dean in that the benefit, the joy, and the hard thing about working for Janice was she was amazing at keeping me on my toes in that I'd never had a dean who was doing so much reading around innovation and pedagogical matters. And what that meant was I was constantly on my toes because Janice and I would have these amazing conversations about what we're all doing here, what are the ways we can work with students to transform their experience, what does it mean to be a Salford University student. It was a really intellectually stimulating job, and she is a fantastic dean, and she'll make someone should recruit her as a VC, frankly. But the point was, what it meant was I could do lots of things that were quite innovative, and I just want to talk you through Salford to Success. So if you cast your mind back to this time period, we were deep in COVID lockdown, and I've always had a philosophical position that there is nothing that is incommensurable between academic development and skills development. And one of the big kind of tragedies that I see in the UK higher education system is people have got this real problem with the idea that students can develop technical or other skills. So one of the things I was really interested in, and I am still interested in, is I don't see that there is a particular tension between getting students to do things that develop their academic skills, but also they get technical, discrete qualifications alongside. I'm not talking about students doing computer science degrees. I'm talking about students in other areas. So, for example, I don't understand why you wouldn't want most students on a business degree to do a data analytics discrete qualification, not because you expect them all to be data analysts, but that qualification has value in the marketplace. And the big thing for me that I noticed all across my career working in business schools is the more that you gave opportunities to students who were from first generation or first to university families, opportunities to be on the cutting edge and to develop additional facets to their CV, the more likely they were to get job interviews, right, and get good jobs. And and it's something I'm particularly mindful of, because I remember when I went for my first job interviews, I had no idea what to say. There was nobody in my family to coach me for middle class jobs. So the more that you get students to do things where they have agency and they develop their own skill sets, in my mind, the more you both build their confidence, but you also help them kind of equalize out in the job market, which is structurally unequal. And so I always looked for opportunities to create ways for pathways for students to develop new skills. So during the lockdown period, I was still thinking about how would we do skills development, again in conjunction with my then dean, Professor Janice Allen, who is 100% behind, by the way, doing innovative practice, which was why it was such an enjoyable job. But the point was, we're in COVID lockdown, and I thought to myself, what can we do for those students who are stuck at home, basically? We're in a period in between assessments. How can we give them something to do, keep them engaged? But equally, I was mindful of at the time, staff were heavily involved in marking. They had their own COVID things going on. I did not want to design anything that was workload intensive for any staff members. So the challenge I set myself was, could I create a program that would only be run by me? Could I run it alone, right? Which, looking back, was a bit of a strange way to do it, but you know, that was just how I was. So I created Salford to Success, and the idea with Salford to Success, as I'll talk you through, is students could drop in and out of a whole range of events. They could upskill, they could gain new qualifications. There was some networking activities, and also a whole range of other community activities. Okay, but underpinning it was this idea: were there ways to get students' career capital up because they gain these additional facets to their CV? Okay, so the way that Salford to Success worked, and I'll be fairly brief about this bit. The university had Microsoft Teams, right? And I thought to myself, Teams is actually the quickest and easiest way to do this. So I set up a Teams site with a range of channels for different aspects of what we were up to. The other nice thing about using Teams, if you try this yourself, is you can provide a code, right? Teams has a way of providing codes. So instead of me having to onboard students, they just went onto Teams, entered the code, and it added them to the site. Not This is not meant to be a replacement for VLEs like Blackboard, but for self-service, this was much, much easier. So I set up the team site. We did some advertising of it, and it was broken down into some different aspects. First of all, there was some on-demand community employability activity, which meant that students could do this activity whenever they liked. Because the other thing I'm really mindful of is students have a lot going on. They may have caring responsibilities, they may have other responsibilities. I think the nature of being a student has changed, and we're seeing this at the moment with student attendance. The second thing was there were on-demand qualifications, which I'll talk about in a moment. The final thing is there were also internal and external live events that they could go to. And again, I'll unpick these shortly. So the first thing is, the other challenge I made to myself was, what could I build using no additional resources? We are in a period where the universities are struggling with the resources they have. The thing that blows my mind and continues to blow my mind about universities is they pay for a whole range of services which they never really, if I can use a crude term, sweat the asset. They're offered to people, but they're never really pushed in a significant way. I was really lucky that the Salford University, the library staff and learning technologists were so enthusiastic and so supportive and really fantastic in supporting me and getting this up and running. So I took loads of advice off them. So the university paid for LinkedIn Learning. So I put together a series of pathways on there related to either for lower level students enhancing their ability to do well on their degree and building their confidence, for higher level students things around transitions into the workplace and getting their first job. I also put an option on there that they could get points, and I'll talk about points in a moment. They could get points for doing something fun, like doing a photography course or learning to play the guitar or the drums, right? There was no cost to me to do this because we already paid for the resource. The second thing was we had a relationship with an organisation called BeWise, and BeWise had put together some career material for the university. Again, it was already paid for. I talked to them and said, look, do you mind if I repackage this into the Salford to Success program? And they were really great. They worked with me on doing a kind of bespoke front end, didn't charge me anything for it. And so the careers material they'd already provided, we repackaged into this. And so you can see here that what could happen is students would go through, and just in the same way with the LinkedIn learning material, they would go through and prepare using the Be Ready candidate material. And they could do short quizzes, answer questions, and so on, right? At the end, it noted if they'd completed the activity. And the thing about this was the final element of it was, and this again blows my mind, most universities have a relationship with Microsoft, right? And so we had Microsoft Office Specialist available to the students anyway. They could do it anywhere, at any point. So we built it into the Salford to Success program. That was one of the activities that they could do for points. Honestly, yes, it sounds really boring doing Microsoft Office, but seriously, go out and look at the job market, right? You look at what having even a basic Excel qualification does. And remember as well, my underlying philosophical aim here is to help students who come from similar backgrounds like myself, who potentially are trying to overcome structural inequality, right? I'm going to take any advantage I can give them. And so we built into this that students could get points for doing the Microsoft Office Specialist courses. And by the way, if I can rant for a moment, Microsoft, the educational side of Microsoft, is great to work with. Honestly, I always had a great relationship with them. And I'll do this in another video, but we started doing things with them around data analytics, and they were fantastic to work with. Really knowledgeable and really enthusiastic. Okay, so I know Microsoft get terrible press for all sorts of historical reasons, but I always found them great to work with. It's not an endorsement, sorry Microsoft, but I did. So here's the final element of it, right? The final element is quite a few students wanted to get involved in employability or thinking run their own business. I did not have the time or the resource put on a load of live sessions. So I went out to the internet and found what I thought were appropriate sessions that students could attend. Google has a Google Garage, and they put on a whole range that repeated, by the way, so students, if they missed a session, could go to another one, of really, I think, really high quality with experts sessions on a range of things like, getting your site up and running, your social media strategy, how do you build your personal brand if you're self-employed, and so on and so on. They were about an hour in length, and if students registered for them and attended, Google would send them an email that monitored their attendance. Okay. The final element of this was there was the social aspect, which was really fun, and I would have a daily challenge, and people would respond to the daily challenge. It might be about what can you see out of your window, and you would post a picture or answer a question. And the thing about this that I really liked, remember this was in the depth of COVID, yeah? It really brought people together and people saw each other in a different light. So there were these daily challenges that people could do, and I would pick a winner every day. And I had small token prizes, but it was a lot of fun for the students, and I really enjoyed it too. So the final element of this is important, but well, it's not important, but it made it important. I basically did an element of gamification, right? Simply joining the site gave the students some points. Also, if you wrote an email or a text, an instant message to a classmate, kind of sending them a positive message of support during COVID, you also got some points. Now that one was on the honour code system. I required no proof that students had done that. I just said, do it, and if you've done it, claim the points, because I trust students, right? So I don't require proof of that. Now the rest of it, fundamentally, students could do as little or as much as they wanted, and they got XP points. The other thing I did was, if they did more activities, they got multipliers. So if they started them early, they got multiplier points. If they did more of them, they got multiplier points, right? In some of them, if they did 3 of the chosen activities, the points were doubled. If they did 4, the points were 4 times as much. The point was students could do as much or as little as they wanted, and there was a mixture of synchronistic and asynchronistic activities. The other really interesting thing that came out of all of this, which I absolutely love and blew my mind, was that students as well, uh, there was a cafe area basically, and students were just talking to each other. But what happened was people started to talk about their degrees, what they were writing, and so the conversation you see on the screen was a conversation I had with a group of students. I generally didn't get involved unless there was something where I felt I wasn't overwhelming the conversation. And so we were having conversations about what should I write about the essays I'm working on. It was really, really great. And it was another multiplier because we had really good discussions about things like what does a good essay look like and what does Charles mean when he talks about having a thesis, right? It was a very nice community activity. And the final thing that I absolutely loved, this was brilliant. So if you've ever used Kickstarter or crowd funding sites, they often have stretch goals. So I said to the students, if we hit a certain level of engagement by a certain day, I will run a 1990s disco. Okay. And I ran this 1990s disco on Teams. The students thought it was hilarious. But the best thing about it was, remember this is in COVID, the best thing about it was, is that parents attended. I'd never met many of my students' parents, but they came. And we had all sorts of funny things. So there were conversations about the university, but you'd have things like students saying, my mum says, will you play this? Right? So I was playing all sorts of 90s music for people's parents. But again, I thought it was really nice because fundamentally, people's parents then got to see another side of the university. They got to ask me questions about how Salford to Success had worked in between songs. We were using the chat feature. So again, it kind of, there was this just level of interaction that I've never really had with parents in another way. So let's talk about what actually happened. So the first year I ran it, 200 students engaged, around about 200. Now, according to their the returns they did, the XP returns, the points, I could work out roughly how many hours it would take students. So they did round about 4,500, 5,000 hours of activity. But there were a really small number of what I call whales, in that around 20 of them did in excess of 60 hours. Now, this was done over 2 weeks. There was no requirement for students to do lots of hours, but because many of them were at home with nothing to do, they really got into it. And some of them also went off and did really large discrete qualifications. So one of the things that came up is I'd considered, should fundamentals of digital marketing, which is a free Google course, be on there, but it's 40 hours, right? So I thought it's too big, I'm not going to include it. But many of the students via Google Garage went off and did the fundamentals of digital marketing. Now, this is not me doing a promo for Google or saying that Google course is the best, but what's really interesting about it is it teaches students a level of language that for business and management students, even if they're not marketing students, right, it increases their lexicon, I think that's the right word, and their ability to understand common terminology that they may encounter in the workplace and in a job interview. And so part of my reasoning for some of the things I picked for qualifications is I wanted to deepen and broaden the student's ability to talk in certain ways that made sense in interviews. Again, to overcome, as best as I could as an individual, some of the structural issues that we know students face, right? And it just blew my mind how many of them went off and did these things. Student feedback was really excellent. This is just a anonymized selection, which I did get permission from the students well in advance of using it, and I told them it'd be anonymized and they were fine. And I should mention as well here, an ex-colleague of mine, Maggie Costello, who would run Microsoft exams for the students who wanted to sit them. The students absolutely loved Maggie, and I'm sure they still do, because she's a really great example of how, as an academic, We should be working with our third space colleagues and our colleagues in library services and other places to benefit students, right? When we come together, it's just so much more powerful for students. I think actually, can you tell I'm really enthusiastic about this in a way that I'm not about AI, even though I talk about it a lot. Some lessons, right? Students don't want to be online all the time. We know this, and we know we've got all these kind of issues about getting students to go back to the campus. But students will be online if they see added value, right? If they see community, if they see there are opportunities for kind of improving their life chances. Um, Universities need to be much better at sweating the assets. The additional cost to the institution of 500 or 5,000 students doing LinkedIn Learn is zero. It's a set contract. Many of the services that universities buy are set. I used to buy a case centre license from the case centre. Brilliant organisation, by the way. Do get in touch with them. And that was set price, so I could use that as much as I want. We're not good as institutions at sweating the asset, maximising the value of things that we pay for. The SSR attached to this, student staff ratio, is entirely different to scheduled teaching. The SSR in this case was 250 odd to 1, just over 200 to 1, and it worked, right? It didn't require lots of staff time. And remember, I did not actually want to involve the staff because they had lots of other things going on, including marking. The cost benefits high because the additional cost was zero, because everything was from pre-existing resources. Yes, it took some of my time, but it was not a significant amount of time. It fitted really well with what the school wants to do and Professor Allen's vision for the school, which is, if I can embarrass her again, she's really clear about if a student comes to Salford Business School, they should get academic rigor, but it's more than that. It's more than that. And actually, when I worked at the business school, the whole deanery was really clear. I know people think that deaneries are full of like people involved in all of these schemes, but honestly, I spent more time in that deanery talking about, but what would the impact of this be on students and staff than anything else, right? I've got no hidden agenda in saying that. Honestly, yes, we didn't always make the right decisions, but everything always revolved around what was the benefit to the students and how would this impact staff in delivering it. So this fit well with the vision and brand of the school. And the ramifications and things to think about is we did an end of year follow-up survey to track progress. Loads of students continue to use the services, so they continue to use LinkedIn. And remember, if you do LinkedIn qualifications, they appear on your profile. Yes, I know people think that LinkedIn is the face of neoliberalism, blah, blah, blah. But if you're a first generation student, right, you need to be where people are doing the hiring. And so I've got no qualms in getting students to try and generate profiles on LinkedIn if it's going to mean that it improves their life chances. Sorry, I'm just going to go for it. It's just how it is. Um, it also, and I never got to follow this through because I moved on. It seems to me we do need to think about increasing the number of modules and programs which have discrete standalone qualification as a way of influencing graduate outcomes. I could talk about this aspect all day, right? Please do get in touch with me if you want to talk about this, because I think, especially in England, with B3 and all of the different aspects, I think this is a solid way for not a lot of capital law OPEX investment in influencing graduate outcomes in the future. SBS, when I was there, and they've continued to do, continues to look at how can you maximise the use of these existing assets, both as wrapper activities like Salford to Success, but also thinking about how to embed them more in programs. I think there's scope for adaptation of this kind of activity as an enhancement for clearing students. I think you could use it for the basis of early doors synoptic assessment for level 4 for low stakes. And I also think there's a completely different version of this, a higher level version of this for PGR students. I think all PGR students, for example, there are a whole range of discrete project management qualifications, right? I think all PGR students, especially PhD students, should get some basic data analytical qualifications, but project management qualifications. Most of them are not going to be academics. Give them qualifications that translate into the workplace, right? And again, this is not about neoliberalism. If you're recruiting people onto these postgraduate courses, well, it's your job. It's your job to make sure that you're enhancing their life chances. I do not see anything incommensurable between saying to a PhD student, you need to develop a really rigorous novel contribution to the literature, and also saying, but by the way, here are some additional qualifications that will stand you in good stead in the job market. I just don't see the problem.